If you've been a fan of this channel for a while, you might remember this one.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to this week's lesson. Today we're going to do something a little different. We are going to explore what I consider to be the top 5 transcribable J.J. Johnson licks.
This summer marks 5 years since I started posting jazz trombone-centric content here on YouTube. With that in mind, I thought I'd actually look back at some of the stuff I posted in that very first year to see if there were any things that needed a little bit of a refresh or maybe some concepts that we could dig into a little bit deeper. With that in mind, we are looking at 5 more of my favorite J.J. Johnson solos. Now, if you never checked out that first video, I'd really encourage you to do so, even though I think here, 5 years later, my production values are better, my ability to kind of communicate on camera is a little bit stronger, but the actual content that is there in that previous video, I think is really great. Those are really important solos that we as jazz trombone players really want to get a handle on, and the information is still useful, even if the production values here 5 years later are a little better. All right, let's jump into it with our first solo here 5 years later. Now, this first one is one that I really don't know how I didn't include it in that first list. Maybe I was just trying to weigh different concepts that I was trying to cover. But that is JJ's solo on Old Devil Moon from the eminent J.J. Johnson Volume 2. This is just a must-know solo for any trombone player out there. Now, we're not going to listen to any of the original recordings today. I will throw all of the links down in the description just to keep my channel nice and copyright compliant here on YouTube. I really avoid using those type of things. While it does all fall under fair use, a lot of times you still end up getting copyright pings, which can limit people's access to this content. So I really try to avoid that. Go check out JJ playing this, because really what you want to grab from this solo is not just the licks. We'll talk about that in a second, but it's all the other stuff. His sound, his time feel, his articulation, all the key elements of his playing are on display in this solo, so we can really glean something from that when we transcribe this. Now, that's not to say there is not some really useful vocabulary in this solo. This is kind of in the first half of the solo. There's 2 really great 2-5-1 licks. Along with the big picture items of any transcription, you also really got to make sure you get in there and pull little nuggets that you can put into your practice. I sometimes find people skip this step of sort of digesting the solo. It's already time consuming enough to sit there and transcribe an entire solo. So if you don't actually take the time to then incorporate some of that stuff and assimilate it so you can use it in your playing, hopefully at first imitate, but then go to innovating it and creating it in new ways, you're really missing a huge amount of mileage that you can get from all of that time that you invested in transcription. On to our second solo. This is JJ playing on Now's the Time. This is on the In Person album. We are going to look at his second chorus, and when you hear this example, I want you to pay attention to how he uses motivic development. I would consider JJ a relatively motivic and melodic player. So the way he develops a very simple motive here, it's not even really a melodic shape. It's just like a 4-note rhythmic pattern that we hear at the ends of some of these phrases and carries it through. He's always changing the melody shapes, but we as the listeners still connect with that. Oh, there's some rhythmic repetition here. There's something I can grab onto. That's sort of like what makes this little chunk of his solo tick and something we ideally want to take from this solo. One other element that really stands out to me when I listen back to this solo is this idea. This happens at the end of the 4th chorus, and just like probably for many trombone players, this is an idea that I hear myself playing all the time in my own solos. And in some ways, this is like the best case scenario where I transcribed this solo probably when I was in maybe my early 20s, definitely when I was in the early part of college, and have just heard it a lot over the years, so it's just sort of filtered into my playing. Not that I necessarily want to copy JJ. It's not about copying just to be like, haha, I copied you and I can play your stuff. It's really about being a part of the continuum of this music. You know, JJ was influenced by people. I'm influenced by JJ. You know, maybe some of my students or somebody listening to me is hopefully hearing some things that they enjoy. That is really the beauty of transcription, is getting in touch with the tradition and then hopefully doing something interesting with it. Cool. On to solo number 3. This is definitely one of the most cited and most transcribed JJ solos. You can again find it on that JJ In Person album, but you can also find it on the Trombone Master. A lot of these recordings from this time period appear on multiple different albums, and so you just got to make sure that you're being aware that some of them are all the same version, some of them are maybe different versions. This is the tune Laura, an absolute classic. We are going to dig into one concept on this. That is the use of diatonic triads. In the third phrase of JJ's first chorus, he plays this idea. This is a diatonic triad idea, something you find all over the place in sort of the jazz language and definitely very common in JJ's language. So it's something that we really need to get in touch with if we want to understand his playing. So what's going on here? We are creating triads that fit either into the chord of the moment or that fit into the large scale key center. This particular idea we could look at in both ways. So we look at it in terms of the chord of the moment. Our first chord is an F minor triad. An F minor 7 chord. We start way up on the high G. That is the 9, and we build a triad going down. G, E flat, C. That's a C triad. That fits into F minor. We would maybe thinking about F Dorian to pull all the other notes that we'd be building these triads from, and then he just moves that down through the chords diatonically. First we start on the G, then we start on the F, again, building triads going down. Now we get to the B flat 7 chord, we'll do the exact same thing, still building these triads down, but thinking in terms of B flat dominant 7, which would be B flat mixolydian. So that's if we're thinking chord of the moment, a very important skill. But this is a 2-5-1 to E flat major. So we could actually think of this entire thing as just the diatonic triads that are relevant to E flat. So again, if we think about this whole lick, we're back up on that high G. That's a C minor triad. That fits into E flat major. The next one is a B flat major triad, fits into E flat major, so on and so forth. Being able to think about it in both ways is incredibly important. Depending on what's going on in the music, sometimes really thinking about the chord of the moment is very, very important. Sometimes thinking big picture and thinking about what the key center is very useful. Both things are going to allow you to access this really common type of sound. If we really want to get this into our playing, we've got to think about how we move it from a transcription into the practice room. So it's a 2-5-1. So we could just practice it straight up like a 2-5-1, figure out where we want to sort of like chop it out of the solo, how much of the lick we want to use, and then just plug it into some sort of 2-5-1 practice cycle. If you're into having some of this stuff all spelled out, some of these 2-5-1s we can pull from these solos, some of the other licks and that sort of thing, make sure to check out the virtual studio as always. The link is down in the description. Full handout on all the kind of like different stuff that's in these solos. Now, if we want to think about it just not only in what goes on in a 2-5-1, we could also think about how this fits to like a large scale key center. As we already know, this is an E flat major idea if we think about the key center in this particular place in the solo. So we could just practice all the diatonic triads in E flat. In our case, since JJ starts from the 5th of each one and descends, we're going to do that. From there, we might also want to think, what if I wanted to apply this on a minor 7 chord? Once you've got a handle going all in one direction, then you can start to alternate, up one triad, down the next. You can also start to look for these types of ideas across the playing of other individuals. For example, this next one is one that you'll find all over the place in Steve Davis's playing. He's someone who I think really comes from that JJ approach. Only 2 solos left. This fourth one you can either find in that Trombone Master album, or there is also an album under this title. This is the tune Blue Trombone. This is a long solo. It's like 15 choruses. It's something that I actually never transcribed the entire thing when I was in sort of my heavy JJ transcription phase. But the thing that we can hear on display in this solo, even though it's so long, the ideas never become labored. They don't become super repetitive. JJ has a great sense of pacing and of sort of development through this solo. One of the classic lines that you hear in this solo and all over the place in his playing starts at the beginning of the 4th chorus. The first little chunk of that idea, is is something he plays like all the time. You hear that in a lot of different solos, and it's almost like a non-lick. It can be something that we can really think, well, do I really want to practice that in all 12 keys? It seems relatively simple. And it might be true, but if you're someone who finds that like you don't have a lot of stuff to play, except when you're on 2-5-1s or except when you're sort of plugging in a pattern, you might need to pay attention to more of those type of ideas when you're transcribing, this sort of like just melodic content that is really important to being a fully fledged solo. I think many people go through that time period where it's like, okay, I've started to get some stuff together, I've worked on some 2-5s, I know some licks, but their solos just sound like sort of a collection of licks. There's nothing kind of connecting them together or giving sort of continuity to the solo. So just make sure that even if it's not like a hip harmonic thing or a specific lick that you feel like, hey, I can pull that out, that you don't just sort of like let it go in the solo. You still might want to practice an idea like that in some keys just to kind of see how it feels in different parts of the range, all that sort of stuff. It will really help to give a more fully formed sound to your improvisation. All right, we made it all the way to number 5. This is the tune Bloozinef. This appears on the Touch of Satin album. It is just a straight up relatively slow, kind of greasy blues, and there's a really particular reason why I wanted to feature this one. As you can hear, this is a stop time section. This occurs right after the melody statement. Now, I don't know if he improvised this or if it was pre-written out, but what we can agree upon is it's relatively simple. It's blues ideas, it's arpeggio ideas. There's not really anything here that we would immediately sort of like write home about as being like, oh my gosh, I have to transcribe this idea. That definitely begs the question, why did I choose to include this here? So my junior year of college, of undergrad, I played a JJ recital where we played all JJ tunes, and this was one of the ones I selected because I wanted sort of a slow, kind of greasy-ish blues. And I remember after that recital feeling like, man, why does JJ sound so much better on this than I just did? He's not really playing anything super complicated. Certainly those concept of arpeggios, blues ideas are things I had command over by that time in my playing, but they were not the forefront of what I was thinking was important. I was still really in the mindset that I got to be like nailing every change and hitting hip 2-5-1s and all this sort of stuff. That may be true, but this solo really marked a turning point in the way that I really was thinking about improvisation. Now, it took several years beyond that for all this stuff to sort of solidify more and me to really become focused on, am I playing with clarity? That's the really key thing that we hear in this solo, and especially for me in JJ Johnson's playing overall. Clarity of sound, clarity of articulation, clarity of ideas. There's never any sort of fat to trim out of there. It's all just lean muscle in the soul. And at least for me, that is where I want my playing to come from. And hopefully I can take some of that from JJ's playing. All right, 5 more solos that I really love from the great JJ Johnson. Between the first video and these ones, these really represent like the main body of JJ tunes that I transcribed. I transcribed some other ones throughout the years that I did not include in these, but these ones really have the stuff that was impactful to me, both from just like a learning the lick standpoint and definitely from a conceptual standpoint. So JJ, at least in my mind's eye, is the center of the jazz trombone style. Obviously, there's lots of things that are in different directions, people who play differently, but to me, he is like the North Star, at least in my own playing, and I really think should be in most people's playing because he is just so influential. Cool. We'll see you in the woodshed.